So my name is Javi Martinez. I am a transgender woman. I've been transitioning, or have transitioned, like about 9 years ago. I've been on hormone replacement therapy for about 9 years. The transition process was very complex and difficult for me, but it is something that I am very, very happy. I feel whole, even if it is challenging. I am part of the ISTA family. I'm a faculty apprentice with Crystal Dawn Morris. I've done 4 level 1s and 2 level 2s, so I'm very familiar with the field, and I really want to honor and thank you guys for letting me come into your container. The biggest thing that I would like for people to get out of this training, and I'm just going to put it out there, is the social belief that our genitalia is our gender. That is absolutely, completely wrong. And if I can get anything through to people today, is that our genitalia does not equate gender. Some of the most hurtful things I've experienced, particularly in ISTA, are facilitators that continue to use the lingam to designate men and the yoni to designate women physically, and split the groups up into those binaries. Mm-hmm. That is one of the most hurtful and invalidating things that happens and still happens. And I'm trying to break out of that model, or break, the whole community out of that model. The sex that we're assigned at birth, our genitalia, are bits, however you want to call it. Bits is sort of a politically correct term that the queer and transgender community like to use because it's sort of neutral. Comes in many variations. Most people feel that it's either male or female. You have a lingam or you have a yoni, but there's intersexed. About 1 out of every 200 people is born intersexed. That means that their physical makeup is in some variation, either a combination, of both male and female genitalia, some of it underdeveloped more than others, both fully developed, and there's a broad spectrum. There's intersex people that may have a visible yoni at birth, but have testicles that have developed that never dropped, as an example. So you may have a yoni, but no reproductive organs inside. So you're basically born sterile. There's so many variations that fall under the intersexed umbrella that our society tends to ignore as not there. And and I'm going to use that as a way to talk about gender, using the intersexed as the example for how our genitalia doesn't equate gender. For many intersexed individuals at birth, parents and doctors, and sometimes it's just doctors, decide to choose the sex and therefore gender of the individual. And 95% of the time, I'm creating the number, but I'm going to say it's about 95% of the time, they choose to turn the baby into a woman and assign her female at birth, and they remove the lingam and the testicles, and sometimes even do sexual reassignment surgery to make the vagina and the yoni fully functional with those parts. And I can honestly tell you that over half the time the doctors get it wrong. Mm-hmm. Over half the time the doctors get it wrong. That intersex person was actually a man. But the doctors decided that they were going to be raised and grow up as a woman, and they just had their genitals removed. So it's a very, very serious thing that happens. There's a large percentage of people that consider themselves transgender, that's what happened to them because they basically realized, I have the wrong gender, I was given the wrong hormones through adolescence. I need to now transition to what is my true gender, regardless of what the doctors decided when I was younger. So on many levels, I'm not intersexed, but that's effectively how I am. You know, there was a, you know, to put it in a medical term, my chromosomes made it that in utero, testosterone was pumped out to shape my body in order to get male genitalia. So it's a birth condition that I was born with the wrong genitalia, right? And then I grow up and realize something is off. So being transgender can be seen as a prenatal birth condition that our society hasn't fully embraced.
Would using the word like birth defect in a way be appropriate here?
I don't know if defect is the right term, because that puts a certain stigma and connotation that is that it's wrong, or I don't know how else to the language to use. It's
taking it down to the genetic level. Is there, there's two X, or there's an X and a Y. That seems very binary. Is there actually a partially expressed Y?
Yes, there's different, right? Just like intersex people, there's a lot of variations. As people sometimes have more X's than Y's, more Y's than X's. There's multiple. It isn't just one X, one Y. You can actually have two or three, which affect your hormonal and biological development through utero and through your whole life, really. So yeah, that's another common medical misconception, is that everybody has an XX or XY and that's it. No, there's actually multiple variations with multiple X's or Y's within that chromosomal.
Develop with different
right, and then it could affect how people develop, but there's no clear way to track it. Yeah, so very simply, that's really the difference between sex, biological, sexual reproduction organs, bits, and gender. Gender is different. Now I'm going to move into the gender identity and gender expression end of things. Gender identity is difficult also because in society, normal people or cis people never have to think about their identity. You know, no one ever goes, oh, my identity is male, or my identity is female. It's sort of an abstract thought that is sort of put on non-binary people. It's a very weird social construct that we have to talk about identity as opposed to who we are. Does that make sense? So that's why the language is imperfect. The language is very imperfect. It's a work in progress. There's a lot of terminology that is being used and accepted as progressive and helpful and used in trainings that is actually very invalidating and hurtful. For example, gender expression. Gender expression is a very hurtful thing because that puts the emphasis on people like me that I'm supposed to express myself a certain way in order for people to see me as who I am. And all women go through this. What's a real woman look like? The hair color, the body shape, the face. All women go through this, all right? For people like me, there's this added little element that I have to, by society standards, try harder to fit that standard because testosterone has shaped my voice this way, has shaped my cheekbones this way, has given me an Adam's apple. So society expects that I'm going to go out of my way to pass. And that's the term for gender expression. If you go to any therapist, you go to any clinical social worker, you go to any doctor, you go get hormonal replacement therapy, they want to know if you can pass. And it's a common term that everybody uses. However, it's very hurtful and invalidating because it's basically saying, I have to pass as something that I'm not. Do you guys follow how that language is hurtful? And gender expression is also a societal construct that's very difficult. to match and be able to follow for everybody, not just transgender people. About a year ago, 9 months ago, Donald Trump was talking about dress like a woman. Like if you went to Congress or the White House or within the government, he had a certain dress code for women, and he was tweeting out dress like a woman. And all the women across the country were hitting him on Twitter with police uniforms, military uniforms, doctor uniforms, and all these different dress uniforms that are generally considered masculine, but they're women, and they're hitting him like, what does it mean to dress like a woman? You know, society still has this need for women to dress a certain way. I couldn't get hormone replacement therapy until I demonstrated that I could live as a woman by wearing makeup, traditional women's clothing of dresses, all those kinds of things in my regular life. I had to demonstrate to them that I was doing that in order to get hormones prescribed to me. Gender expression is also funny because in our society, we decide what's masculine, what's feminine, what's women's clothes, what's men's clothes. In the Christian priesthood, Catholic priests, for example, they wear a long robe. That robe is actually a dress. It's called a frock. When a priest gets their collar taken away or they quit the priesthood, it's called defrocked. They're undressed. But society views their robe and their dress as masculine and men's clothing. But it's a dress. We understand a kilt as being a male warrior's attire is a pleated skirt. Right? You put a kilt on a woman, it looks like a pleated skirt. It might have pockets, which is nice. But ultimately, it's a skirt. If you go to Africa, they're going to be like, why is this man wearing a skirt? You go to the Western world, they go, yeah, freedom, right? Braveheart, right? Everybody knows Braveheart in the Western world. So again, it's a matter of social conditioning of what is masculine, what is feminine, what's male clothes, what's female clothes. And I will wrap up the gender expression piece with whatever clothes I put on are women's clothes because I'm a woman. Whatever clothes any of you put on is male or female clothes based on whatever your gender is or how you feel that day. Right?
Yeah.
So the store may say this is a man's shirt, but I'm a woman. If I buy that shirt, that's my shirt. That's a woman's shirt. I bought that shirt, I'm a woman, that's a woman's shirt. And that goes across the board, right? So gender expression is actually a controlling thing that our society uses to control who and what we are, and I mean we collectively. Is there any questions about that? Yeah.
No, question. Just, it really struck me as you were talking about that, what you were required to do in order to get hormone therapy. Yeah. I don't wear makeup. I very rarely wear a skirt because I don't like them so much, for various reasons. And nobody would question that I'm a woman.
Right.
So it was like, whoa, my God! Like, what kind of standard is that?
Thank you. Gender identity, or the different types of genders, is more like what I like to say. You have female, male, and other, just to simplify it, right? The male, woman, girl is pretty self-explanatory if you're in the cis world. Male, man, boy is pretty self-explanatory within our society.
Can you define cis? Some people
Yes.
have never heard that.
Cis is actually a Latin term that is used medically in medical procedures to designate normal, and then trans comes from the same root, opposite of other than, different than the norm. So it's actually a medical term that's being applied to societal norms, that people that are born with this, that have a congruency between their genitals and their gender are considered normal, therefore cis.
Thank you.
Yep, and then those of us that fall under the other category, non-binary or transgender umbrella, they use trans because it sort of designates other than, different, and transition. Trans is also part of transition, change, etc.
Transformation.
Transformation, thank you. The other genders, there's probably 1,000 different terminologies, names, genders that people want to go by. And I'll go into some of them. I just want to say that however the gender non-binary person feels is their gender. And if they ask to be called or referred to in a certain way or a certain pronoun, please honor it, because that is who they are. You know, we don't get to decide what anybody is. And coming from a place of love and respect, honor who people are. I prefer and ask for people to use the feminine pronouns of she, her, as you've heard people here refer to me, because that's what makes me happy. That's what makes my heart happy. When people misgender me and call me a he, it hurts my heart. It does, it hurts me. It's simple if you're talking like a trans woman like myself, because I'm going to be up here in the female category, or a trans man, they're going to be in the male category. But then there's lots of people within the umbrella that fall somewhere in between. And they can go from being gender queer, gender fluid, third gender, other gender, androgynous, androgyny, any of the, there's a lot of people that have different terms for how they feel. But the most common now in this particular area is gender queer, as a way to designate that you're somewhere within the spectrum, but you're not at one of the two polarities. The difficulty that I have with the term queer, which is sort of like an umbrella term that a lot of people use to identify themselves, because this is so complicated that when people ask someone like me, how do you identify? Sometimes it's more like, I'm queer. Can we just move on, because I don't have the time to get into all of this with you? So I'm queer, and that's what people do. The problem is that that's not always the case in other parts of the country. Queer is not always a safe word. Queer is still a derogatory term in lots of parts of the country that is used in hate crime. And people get triggered and hurt by that term if they came from a place where they were being called queer their whole lives and getting beaten up and harassed and everything else. So the queer community, for lack of a better term, is trying to appropriate that term and use it as a term of power, sort of like a pink triangle, for gay men from Nazi Germany. So we're trying to take queer and turn it from a derogatory term into one of power and identity. But just be aware that most people don't take kindly to the word queer, so you have to wait for them to identify themselves to you, or you might give insult. So the other genders, the gender queer spectrum, there's people that feel like they're right in the middle, an equal mixture of both, or a combination of two. There's people that feel fluid, which means that they will go between male and female. It can go from, any minute of the day to a couple hours of the day to how you wake up in the morning. And it could fluctuate from day to day, minute to minute. And it's a very difficult thing to track, not just personally as someone who at one point felt was gender fluid, but also for the other people around them. Because if I come in one day, and I'm all feminine, and I'm like, I want to be referred to in the feminine pronouns, and I'm soft and gentle, then everybody's like, oh, okay. And then I come in the next day, and I'm like, yo, what's up? Today I'm a man, let's talk football. Then people are like confused, I may ask to be referred to as a man, like he. No, today I want to be a he. And it confuses people. And for people like me, it's, you know, the common response was, I knew you were full of crap with being a woman. Do you know what I mean? So it's a very, very complex, difficult issue to navigate. And it's really a matter of being open and accepting and understanding of all of the dynamics in order to let the person really be who they are, where they are in that moment. And a lot of times, there's the Q in LGBTQI. Most people use LGBT. I like to use LGBTQI. Q is for questioning, because there's times that we don't know. You know, there's days I wake up and I go, oh my God, what the hell am I doing? Is this really me? Am I doing the right thing? Because sometimes I do question. It's a big step to transition. It's a big step to come out. It's a big step to do all of this. And sometimes we do question. And sometimes we wake up in the morning and be like, I'm firmly in the queue. I don't know what is going on with me or my life or anything else. You know, give me space.
And the I, what does the I stand for?
Intersexed. The intersexed. But I personally have a problem with the intersex being put so far behind. Sometimes it's not even included. Other times it's put in after a gender non-conforming designation. You're going to hear a lot of gender non-conforming people. A lot of youth these days, a lot of teenagers are all about I'm gender non-conforming. And they're sort of being put into the transgender category. And maybe they're the questioning, I don't know. Personally, this is just me, and not to give offense to anybody out there, but I don't consider someone who's gender non-conforming to be transgender or gender queer, because what they are basically saying is, I don't conform to gender roles. I don't conform to gender rules. I don't conform to gender dress, to the gender expectations. I'm gender non-conforming. That doesn't mean they're gender non-binary, meaning they're still either, you know, I would say identify as male or female, but don't conform to the roles, to the dress, to the codes. So, you know, they're paving their own way. And maybe eventually they might step into the gender queer, gender fluid, and, you know, if that's who they are. But I would put them more into questioning and that they're just not conforming to social norms. But they have to be respected in their expression and not forced to wear or act a certain way that doesn't fit with who they are. There's also new terms that are being used, transfeminine and transmasculine. That's another term that's coming around for people that are in the genderqueer spectrum but don't fully identify as female or male. They say I'm transfeminine or I'm transmasculine. Usually it's people that are, you know, male to female would say I'm transfeminine, female to male transgender would be transmasculine, where, you know, if you look at it on a grid, they're not fully in the male or the female, they're sort of like at that 80% mark. And so they don't fully identify, so they'll say, like I could say I'm transfeminine, you know? So there's a lot of that kind of language coming out that sort of helps to honor the other genders that don't want to fully be like lumped into the, you know, the full female or male binary. Gender identity and sex assigned at birth is the term transsexual. That was a term that was used, you know, 40, 50 years ago. It no longer applies for most people. There are some transgender individuals that like the term, will use the term and own it, and they love it. But the vast majority don't, because of the distinction of identity and genitals. That a transsexual implies that they're going to have or have had genital reassignment surgery. That the term transsexual still equates the genitals, the sexual body parts, with the gender. So most transgender people don't like the term transsexual because of that, because it still keeps that belief system in place that genitals equal gender, and that I have to change my genitals in order to be a gender.
That's very important.
Right. So a lot of people still use that transsexualism because of that, but it is something that most people don't use anymore because of that reason. For the gender, non-binary, the gender queer, a lot of them have different terms that they like to be called. There's a Z, is that it? Like ZE. There is them, they. There's different terms that people prefer based on where they fall within the spectrum. And it's very important that they, them, be honored in that way. I have a friend who was actually born intersexed, and they had their lingam removed, and they've grown up and they feel that I'm both. I was born with both. I'm both. They can feel that as part of them, that is who they are. So they prefer to be called in the third person pronoun of they, them, they. And I try to honor that. And I'll slip. Sometimes I refer to them as a she because that's how they present, right? With their expression. So it is something that we all do. We all have our implicit bias, is what it's called, our own social biases that sometimes we can't get out of. How to ask what pronouns people prefer, and that's basically it, is to ask them, how do you identify and what pronouns do you prefer? Yep, it's that simple. Yep. Using those two questions puts basically genderqueer people at ease. It helps us know that you have some understanding of gender, and it automatically puts us at ease because we're like, oh, okay, this person has understanding, and then we can say, oh, I identify as this, and I prefer X, Y, or Z. The question was, what kind of ways do people approach me to discuss my gender?
That are offensive.
That are offensive. Yeah, I mean, it comes from lack of awareness. It's more like, so what are you? Are you like a man? Are you like, it comes from lack of awareness. The old, I want to say old, but it's still used today, offensive and invalidating language that is used for people like me when people talk about being transgender, particularly transgender woman, is that I'm a man who thinks he's a woman, right? I'm sure you guys have all heard that at some point, right? So any kind of questions that are within that framework are hurtful and offensive because from the very start, I'm being invalidated as a woman. The person is already coming at me like you're a man who thinks. Right? It's very invalidating. So anything that has that flavor. The other piece I was going to just put out there, now that you mentioned things that are offensive that cis people do. And again, it comes from our bias. It comes from the fact that people don't understand and a lack of awareness. And it comes from curiosity. Ultimately, it comes from a place of privilege. Is people asking me about my genitals. In this kind of a setting, where I'm putting myself out there as an educator, it's expected, it's welcome, and I'm willing to discuss, my personal story and how things work, etc. I'm open to that. But where it becomes hurtful and offensive is when people that don't really know me, or even if they do know me, and they realize that I've transitioned, they immediately want to know about my genitals. And if you really think about it, transgender people are the only people in this world that normal people think it's okay to go and talk to them about their genitals out of the blue at a coffee shop or wherever. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, You know, like it's really a crazy thing, you know, like people wouldn't just look up to Frank and be like, yo, Frank, hey, which way's your cock hanging today? You got it to the left or to the right? You know, like how big are your testicles? Do they hang down? Like, you know, I mean, like it's just not something people do, but transgender people get hit with that on a daily basis. It's almost like everybody feels that they're entitled to know what our relationship to our genitals is and whether or not we're going to have surgery or not and when, and you know, I mean, it's crazy. So in terms of things that are offensive, you know, it's something that really burns people's curiosity. I mean, it's like, oh my goodness, you know, like I want to know, which is great, but you know, try to control yourself, get to know that person better, you know, buy them a cup of coffee, you know, take them out on a date, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, ease into it a little bit.
That feels a bit like, so when are you going to have a child? You've been married for 5 years. When are you going to have a child? It's like talking about their organs and their
reproductive, yeah.
With
exactly. Yeah,
protection.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. So I want to talk about the difference between physically attracted to and emotionally attracted to, because there's a major distinction that most people don't understand. And people tend to equate that if I'm emotionally attracted to somebody, to a specific gender, and to keep this conversation simple for now, we'll talk male, female, that also has to translate to physical attraction. That they're usually interwoven, but they're not always woven. There's plenty of people that are emotionally attracted to, say, women, and that's who they want to build an emotional connection to, build a relationship with, get married to, build a life together, have a house, car, etc. But they're physically attracted to men, right? And vice versa, you know, and anything in between. So this happens. I mean, we all hear about marriages that are like sexless marriages, people that have been married for 20 years and never have sex, right? It's a very, very common occurrence. And conversely, people that feel attracted to people of their own gender get confused because they feel like, oh my God, I want to play with this person, but what does it mean? Am I going to be dating? And you know, and they turn it into an emotional thing when it could just be purely physical attraction. And it's two separate things. And for physical attraction, here they have men, woman, and other genders. And you know, so what you have is the common theme is straight, gay, and bisexual, right? Now, more people are using pansexual as a term. Pan meaning everything, everyone. Because people are realizing that there are other genders, and instead of saying I'm bisexual and putting it on male, female, they're validating the genderqueer and gender non-binary people as people that they are attracted to. And that can go both physically and emotionally. Okay? So more people are using pansexual because it's more honoring of the gender spectrum. It isn't just male or female or both. Pansexual also covers things like ecosexuality, nature sexuality, and those kinds of things. You know, there's people that make love to nature, that go out and make love to a tree, make love to Mother Earth, and things like that, that are attracted physically and emotionally to nature, and they will go and make love to nature. And there's a whole movement on ecosexuality, like the ecosystem, you know, wind, rain, snow, etc. So there's a broad spectrum of sexuality. And emotionally attracted to, I just want you guys to really think about where you sit with that. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, personally, I'm emotionally attracted to women. So when I was growing up and I was a boy and a man, I thought, hey, I'm straight. I'm good with that. Now that I've transitioned, I'm like, holy shit, I'm a lesbian. You know, like, it's sort of like your brain does weird things. And then I found myself being more attracted to men. And now I'm like, oh, okay, so I guess I'm bi. You know, so it's a spectrum. People ebb and flow and change throughout life. gender can also ebb and flow throughout life as well. It's not a fixed thing that if that's what you are today, that's what you're going to be tomorrow. Question was about intersexed individuals and what is the medical community and our society as a whole with laws doing to not mutilate, maim, and change a baby's genitalia at birth. There are no laws because, as you see, all the laws that are coming out are more about keeping people like me out of women's restrooms. So our society is far behind the curve. That being said, there's more and more doctors and more people within the actual medical community that are advocating for not doing genital reassignment surgery on babies when they're born intersexed, and to let them grow into their own and have them decide really who they are and what they want to do with their bodies, because there's people that don't want to have surgery. The question was if there's other countries that are more progressive in the medical field in that regard. I do not know. I think, I hear periodically about some European countries that are more progressive within transgender rights, but I don't know specifically how they're dealing with it medically. Sort of like one has to go before the other, and then they sort of catch up. It's hard to say. I mean, the world is a funny place because within Europe there's progressive countries, and then there's countries like Chechnya that are basically putting gay people in concentration camps and killing them. And Russia as well. So, so gay people, transgender people like myself, we're all being rounded up, put in concentration camps today as we speak. So it's a broad spectrum, and it's not just there, it's also in the United States. There's Christian preachers, I can think of one in California, that preaches violence against people like me, that we need to be killed.
So I'm so grateful to my transgendered friends because I feel like you can act as ambassadors and tell us what it's like to be inside each of the gender worlds. So like I have a female friend who has a high position in a science company that she never would have gotten as a woman, but she ascended and then transitioned and now has the privilege of being in male space as a woman. So I'm kind of curious about your take on that, and also like I'd love to hear what it feels like to be on estrogen, having had time as an adult awash in testosterone, and now having time as an adult awash in estrogen. Could you let us in on that a little bit? Because I'm never going to be on team.
I mean, this is going to be, this would be a long discussion, so I'm trying to find a way. Before I answer that leads to a question, to another teaching point, thank you, is that just like clothes, our bodies are our bodies. So if I'm a woman, regardless of whether or not I'm taking estrogen, I have a woman's body. And conversely, someone that was assigned female at birth that's a trans man, regardless of whether they're taking testosterone or anything else, if they're a man, they have a man's body, even if it doesn't look like it. So so the language is imperfect in terms of male bodies, female bodies, identity. There's a lot of confusion around that. Just with language, even within this field of people that are educating, it's hard to explain it in a way that is validating to everybody. But as far as the difference between testosterone body and estrogen body, I always felt like something was off. I didn't know I was a woman. I really didn't. I grew up as a boy. I would have been, if I had been born with the right genitalia, I would have been a total tomboy. Playing sports, climbing trees, climbing cliffs, running through the woods, roughing it up with all the boys. I mean, that would have been me. So I never knew why I was different, because everything I loved to do was congruent with what all my friends and all the boys who had similar looking bodies did. And then I went through adolescence and, hey, I'm attracted to women. Okay, again, there's a congruency within the social structure. So when I finally took estrogen, and the moment I injected it into my muscle, it was like a coming home. It was like, oh my goodness. I get it. This is who I am. You know, I had doubts along the way, but once the estrogen went in, it was like, I'm home. I'm home. And that's the best way I can describe it. But yeah, it changes your brain, it changes the neural pathways in your brain, it changes everything. And throughout the 9 years of transition, there's been periods where I've stopped taking the estrogen for, 6 months, 9 months at a time. I only did it twice, I think. Once was because I got sick of injecting. I was like, I keep poking myself with a needle. And another time was because I was curious. I was like, okay, now that I've been living like this for a few years, I wanted to sort of get a reference of again, sort of remind myself of what it feels like to have the testosterone coursing through my body. And yeah, I didn't like it at all. I didn't like it at all. I basically realized after a few months when the testosterone was again sort of taking hold of all of the vital functioning of my body and brain that that I didn't like the way I felt. I didn't like the constant need to be moving, to be like the incessant need for sexual release, all that kind of stuff drove me batty. And so being on estrogen is like a release and peace of mind for me. So I hope that answered your question. In terms of the hangings here, the question was about how do these reflect basically what I'm presenting. And there was a question about power dynamics. Personally, I do not see there being the traditional power dynamics in these images. I do not. They are very much even in power and scope. It is not like Adam being on top of Eve or wanting to be on top of Lilith. These are even, and an even exchange of energies between the masculine and the feminine. And for me, I believe that these are really representations of that archetype of the masculine and the feminine. And how people have both masculine and feminine inside, and that's actually what you guys are going to be learning about today throughout the day, and the intermarriage of our masculine and feminine inside. Yeah, the question was about in relationships, interpersonal relationships, how language plays a huge role in terms of communication, and how does that play out within interpersonal relationships, because there's so much information that needs to be shared. There's sort of we'll keep it simple to two areas within the relationship, which is the meeting somebody new or being with someone who you're with someone who then transitions, or vice versa, which is two totally different dialogues, and how that would impact the relationship. So in meeting somebody new, I make it part of my safe sex dialogue, because people need to know what my gender is, because they look at my face and hear my voice and they automatically think man, regardless of the clothes, because there's always transvestites, which are men that like to dress as women, and they enjoy wearing women's clothes, which is different than what we talked about before, where it's a woman that has clothes and women's clothes. So that's so again, it needs to be clarified, because there's elements to intimacy that are different in how I like to be touched, how I like to be approached. And being validated is the number one most important thing. The moment I'm not validated, you might as well just go home, because nothing else is going to happen within the night, possibly within the relationship. Because it is that personal, it is that hurtful, it is that serious. So the early discussions for the safe, for safe sex and just, good relationship building, it's very important to really self-disclose and make sure that the person understands, or be willing to sit with me and have me go through this with them so that they can understand, so that we can move forward. The only other element I would add to that is really the sexual piece, which then would be another layer before we actually got intimate. because of body dysphoria and gender dysphoria issues. It's very easy for us to be triggered. And it's almost like, it's basically like a trauma response. So it's part of, so for me it's part of that dialogue, because we can be getting hot and heavy and sexy and everything will be great, and you know, you could touch my kneecap and I'm going to go into full body dysphoria, hate my genitals, hate my body, oh my god, and just completely have a complete meltdown and basically lose all kind of arousal or interest in sex because I've now fallen into that kind of a space. Or it could be the gender dysphoria, like if I feel that someone is touching me in a way that isn't validating to me as a woman because they just sort of fall into that social programming, you know, that social bias, that because of my voice and my face that they're going to touch me a certain way, then I might fall into a gender dysphoria and feel invalidated as a woman, and it's like a trauma response for us for those of us that are trauma survivors. So it's very important piece of the discussion that has to happen within the safe sex boundaries, etc. dialogue. So thank you for bringing that up. The question is really in like settings like ISTA, how to really be more inclusive. How can someone be more inclusive to you know, people coming in that are not on the binary. Basically, I've learned that I have to take care of myself. So at opening circle, I usually announce it to everybody. I let everybody know who I am, what I am, and what I prefer. And I ask that people refer to me in that way. And I try, in a given time, I try to explain that this is, you know, because it hurts my heart if I'm not treated in this way. And usually within ISTA, it's honored. I mean, I have been fairly well received as a general whole. If I may give ISTA props, when I first came into ISTA, even though there was a lot of invalidation, some of the facilitators within the first training I went to came to me and honestly said, I don't know what to do. Help me, help us, teach us. And for me, that's all it needed. You know, meaning I understand, you guys don't understand, but you were willing to, you were humble and said, I don't know, teach me. Laurie actually came and said that I had lots to offer to the field and wanted me to continue and help bring this forward, and this was 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. So regardless of how the training may have been invalidating in its structure, at the overall level, the message I got was, help us, teach us, you know? So here I am. The question has to do with the language around genitalia for genderqueer people as a whole. It is a very touchy subject, and I should have brought it up, and there was just so much stuff that I forgot. So thank you. The common term that people use is bits. When we talk about our genitalia, we talk about our bits, because genitalia is too genitalia, you know, like, you know, or genitals or whatever. So it's easier to just say our bits or your bits. And that's sort of the politically correct term that is sort of accepted across the board. And again, everybody has their personal preference to what they call their genitalia. So some people that have, you know, that are in full-blown dysphoria and hate that part of their bodies, or they're just totally unaligned with it and everything else, they're going to use the term bits, or they will basically not use medical terminology, and they will be hurt if it is used, because it is a hurtful subject. So yeah, the safe term is bits, unless someone says, yeah, no, it's okay to refer to it in this way. You know, for those of us that have not had surgery, primarily. If we've had surgery, then chances are we're good with what we now have, because now we have a body that's congruent with, you know, who we are and how we feel inside. For me personally, which I think was part of the question, it fluctuates. I don't mind saying I have a penis and I have balls and a testicle and testicles, because I've done a lot of work in healing and learning to love myself. So it is what it is. The distinction is that just like this is a woman's shirt, because I'm a woman, and this is a woman's hand because I'm a woman, and this is a woman's nose because I'm a woman, I have a woman's cock. I have women's balls. So I don't have a problem with that because I view it and feel it as women's genitalia. Now, if we were getting more intimate to the previous question, then I might use language like clitoris for my penis because that's the way it likes to be touched. She likes to be touched and loved and caressed and made love to as a large, elongated clitoris. And that's really what it is. For people like me, the clitoris that normally forms in a woman's body like this and goes in and down was elongated and came out as the penis. You know? So that is what it is. It is a clitoris. It's just an externally visible clitoris. And that's how, so if we're talking intimacy and sex, I would probably be referring to my penis as a clitoris because that's how I want to be touched and loved. But in general conversation, I don't mind using the common terminology for that body part as a form of language and reference, if that makes sense. I just want to say thank you to everybody. My goal really was to educate you guys, like I said. It was an honor for me to be here. I felt really honored when you guys showed trust in me, that you could get up in the sharing circle and be vulnerable in front of someone that wasn't part of the container that was brought into the container. For me, that was a huge honor, and I really want to thank you guys for that, for those of you that really, were able to be vulnerable in front of a stranger. And I know how hard that is because, here I am being vulnerable to a large group of strangers as well. For me, this is an honor. It really is. And thank you all. Thank you. I think that's it. Well done, man.